All right, kiddos, let's talk about our third lesson in Chapter 3 today, which is transactions that affect our owner's equity accounts. So we're going to look at analyzing and recording those transactions that affect owner's equity, as well as looking at analyzing and recording sales and receipts of cash on account. So first off, let's talk about receiving cash from sales. In this situation, our transaction says on January 10th, we received cash from sales of $1,100, calculator tape number 10. Now, a couple things I want to point out. Typically, calculator tape, the number 10 corresponds with the date, so you can see that that's happening here. Let's identify our two accounts that are affected here. One is cash, it's going up with a debit, and then we also have sales, which is also going up, except with a credit. So what happens when we journalize this, it looks a little bit different than we had before. I want to point out a couple of things as we get started. Remember that our first step when we journalize is to put our date in. Again, because we're still on the same journal page that we were when we started 3-1, all we need to do is put the date, which is the 10th. Now, the thing I want to point out is that there is no account that needs to go in the account title because both sales and cash are special amount columns. Right over here, you can see sales and cash are both special amount. However, we do not want to leave our account title blank. Oops. We do not want to leave that blank. So instead, what we do is we put a check mark there to indicate, and what that check mark tells us is that both of the accounts that are affected in this transaction are special amount columns, so we need to look over here. Does that make sense? So we don't want to leave it blank. We just put a little check mark right there. So we put our debit amount in under cash debit, which is $1,100. We put our credit amount in under sales, which is $1,100. And so we put our check mark in to tell us that nothing gets written in the account title. We also put a check mark in the post reference column. This we will talk about more in Chapter 4. So if you forget it right now, it's not the end of the world. We'll talk about it in Chapter 4 again, but just something to point out. And then lastly, but not least, we put in our source document number. Calculator tape is just abbreviated as T, and then the number that it corresponds with. So that is how we journalize cash from sales. Next up, we sold services on account. So it says on January 12th, we sold services on account to Main Street Services for $500. So remember, in this situation, what happened is someone is buying services from us and they have not paid us yet. So our two accounts that are affected are first our accounts receivable. Remember, that is that asset that signifies to us that these people owe us money. So we consider that to be an asset. It goes up with a debit of $500. And then we also have sales, which is going up with a credit of $500. And so what that looks like in our journal, again, we put our date in, still on the same page, so we can just put the 12th. Our debit goes first, which is our accounts receivable. We have to put that in the account title. And then we put that under our general debit, as indicated right there. Third is our credit amount that goes under sales credit, as indicated right here. And then lastly, we need to remember to put our source document in. Sales invoice gets abbreviated S and then 1 for the number that corresponds with it. And that's how we journalize our selling of services on account. Next up, if we paid cash for an expense. So again, notice that all of these are transactions that affect owner's equity. A sale for cash is owner's equity. Selling services on account, that's owner's equity. Now we're talking about paying cash for an expense. So it says on January 12th, we paid cash for a communications bill that included our cell phone and our internet for $80. It was check number 4. So in this situation, first we need to identify our two accounts that are affected. Our account that will get the debit is our communications expense. Remember that is technically an owner's equity account, and that it increases with a debit because technically expenses decrease owner's equity. So that would technically, we have to flip-flop those. And then we have cash, which is going down with the credit. So what that looks like in our journal Again, as always, we put the date first. Same page, so we're still on the 12th. We don't need year or month. Our debit goes in next, which is our communications expense. We write our account title and then our general debit as indicated here. Our credit is for cash. That's in a special amount column, so we fill that in as indicated here. And then we cannot forget to put our source document, which is check number 4, so we just put C4 in there, and it looks just like this. Beautiful. Easy peasy. They also threw another one in there for us, just paying cash for an equipment rental. Same thing, equipment rental is going to be an example of an expense, so that's getting debited for $400, cash is being credited. And then it's literally the exact same thing we just did. They just wanted to give you another example here. So I'm just going to throw these all up here real quick. You can see what that looks like. Now let's talk about one of the last transactions for owner's equity, which means we received cash on account. So in this situation, that Main Street Services, who had bought services from us on account before, now they are paying us. As we received cash on account from Main Street Services, $200, our receipt number is 2. So what's happening here is cash is actually going up with a debit, and our accounts receivable, or the amount that they owe us, is going down with a credit. The thing about these is that they're both assets. Not that that affects anything, it can totally happen. But let's look what that looks like in our journal. Again, we put the date, the 16th. Our debit is technically for cash, so I would fill that in first because I always do my debits first. And then my credit is for accounts receivable, Main Street Services. Again, I don't think I mentioned this before when we had accounts receivable, but this is the abbreviation. Feel free to use that if you need to, if you run out of room. When you are in MindTap, though, I believe that they are going to want you to write the full thing out. I don't believe that you can abbreviate, but you can abbreviate when you do your workbook or your test would be acceptable. And then lastly, don't forget to put in your source document, which is R2 for receipt number 2. And then our final transaction we're going to talk about is when we paid cash to the owner as a withdrawal of equity. So on January 16th, we paid cash to the owner for a withdrawal of equity of $350, check number 6. Remember, what's happening here is that the owner of the business is taking money out of the business and putting it into his personal account. That's his paycheck, essentially. So what's happening here is that that owner's capital account, which is Michael Delgado Drawing, is going up with a debit, and cash is going down with a credit. Now remember that Michael Delgado Drawing account is one of those tricky ones under owner's equity, that technically it's decreasing owner's equity, so it has to increase on the debit side, because owner's equity would decrease with a credit. So in order to make owner's equity go down, it has to be on the opposite side, which is a debit. So what that looks like in our journal, again, date is the 16th. We're still on the first journal page, so we leave it as just the day. Our debit is for Michael Delgado Drawing, so we're going to fill that in first and put our $350 debit in the general debit column. Our credit is for cash, so we put that over in our cash credit column. And then we have our document number, which is C6, and we fill that in under our document number column. And just like that, everybody, you have journalized 5 or 6 transactions. So we are going to head over and do our 3-3 work together in MindTap, and then don't forget you have your on your own, your application, and your terms and questions to complete.